Welcome back. Today we're taking on a really fundamental concept of governance.
Yeah.
It's one of those ideas that is, frankly, the unsung hero of liberty, the separation of powers.
It really is. And it's so much more than just a dry topic for a civics class.
Absolutely. This is the ultimate structural defense, the mechanism against tyranny. And what we found is that it's a concept that is far, far older and way more critical than most of us realize.
It's the architectural blueprint of freedom. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And what makes this deep dive so interesting is that our source material today, and we should mention this is drawn from the research in the book True Courtroom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir, specifically material covered in episode 103. It really forces us to look beyond the usual suspects.
Unusual Enlightenment thinkers, you mean?
Exactly. It reminds us that this need to divide power is a really profound, almost ancient wisdom. It's not just some modern political invention from the 1700s.
That's so true. The material we've pulled together for this is incredibly focused. It traces this one idea across millennia, across continents. We tend to think of constitutions and checks and balances as these purely Western ideas. But these sources, they just reveal a much richer, much more universal history that's rooted in, well, in ethical governance and even religious mandates for justice. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is, I'll admit, a bit ambitious.
Just a bit.
We want to trace this principle from its earliest, most pragmatic use in, historical governments. Then follow it through the philosophical structuring it got centuries later.
Right up to the present day.
Right up to how it's actively and sometimes very dramatically defended in modern courtrooms. We really want to understand why structure, this boring, unglamorous thing, is the ultimate guardian of liberty.
And why defending that structure is maybe the highest duty of any free state. And this whole journey, this entire conversation, it really centers on one profound foundational statement that the source material puts right at the core. It's a thesis that just transcends political systems. It transcends eras. It's simply this: power concentrated is liberty destroyed.
Power concentrated is liberty destroyed.
That is the sort of unavoidable truth we have to grapple with today.
Let's start right there then. Look at that ratio. It sounds so dramatic, almost absolute.
It does, but when you actually look at history, it's less of a dramatic claim and more of a statement of fact. It's not just a warning. It's a predictive model for how states decay.
Okay, so when we say power concentration, what does that actually look like on the ground? Let's make it concrete.
It's the merger of the three essential functions of a state, the catastrophic failure point.
Right, and just to be super clear for everyone listening, those three are the power to write the laws, which is the legislative function.
Yep.
The power to enforce those laws, the executive function. And finally, the power to interpret the laws and judge people based on them, the judicial function.
Exactly. The very moment a single person or a single committee or any single body holds the keys to all three of those functions, the state loses its ability to correct itself. It loses its capacity for accountability.
So it's not a political system anymore.
Not really. Think of it more like a dangerous machine with no brakes, no clutch. And the engine diagnostic system has been ripped out. There's nothing to stop it.
So if you have that one entity holding all three keys, what's the immediate, the visceral experience for an average person living under that system? What's the real world fallout?
The fallout is the total loss of legal predictability. And legal predictability it's like the oxygen that liberty breathes.
I like that metaphor.
Let's imagine you're a farmer. The local governor, who also happens to be the local judge, decides he needs your land for a new road.
Okay.
So first, he puts on his legislative hat and passes a quick decree saying your land is now state property. That's the legislative power.
Done in an instant. No debate.
None. Then he puts on his executive hat and sends his agents to seize your land. Executive power.
And if you try to appeal?
Well, you appeal back to his office. And now he puts on his judicial hat to review your case. The very same person. In that scenario, your rights don't exist under the law. They only exist as long as he permits them to.
I think a lot of people, though, hear about separation of powers and think it just sounds inefficient. They might equate government efficiency with good governance.
Yeah.
Couldn't you argue that a concentrated authority, at least at first, gets things done faster?
Oh, absolutely. That's a critical point. Concentrated power is highly efficient.
Right.
Dictatorships are often incredibly efficient at executing the ruler's will. But the goal of governance in a free society isn't raw efficiency, it's justice. It's stability.
And liberty needs that friction, that delay.
It thrives on it. That friction, that debate, that slowness, Those are the mechanisms that make sure laws are actually thought through, that minority views get heard, and most importantly, that executive action can be challenged with reason. That slow grinding process is like ballast on a ship.
Preventing it from tipping over with every political whim.
Exactly. It prevents those radical destructive shifts that come from the ambition of just one person or one party.
So the first thing to go isn't necessarily, physical oppression. It's the predictability, the trust in the system.
That's the poison. It infects everything. Think about the pillars of a prosperous society: property rights, contract law.
Sure.
Would you sign a 30-year mortgage or invest your life savings into a new business if you knew the legal definition of property could be changed overnight by the same office that enforces contracts?
Of course not. The risk would be insane.
You wouldn't. The second those three powers merge, the legal system stops being a shield for you and just becomes a tool for the government. Commercial confidence, long-term planning, it all just collapses. The erosion of individual rights always follows, simply because the ruler is structurally insulated from any form of accountability.
When you look back at, say, the rise of authoritarian regimes in the 20th century, it's never a sudden flip of a switch, is it? It's that slow, systematic process of weakening the courts.
Or defunding the legislature, or declaring a state of emergency to bypass them. It's a slow strangulation.
And it almost always starts with an appeal to efficiency.
Always. The executive claims the legislative branch is too slow, or that the judiciary is just getting in the way. They promise that if they could just get rid of these checks, they could solve all our problems.
But the checks are the point.
The checks are the solution. They are the necessary friction that keeps the entire system honest. And once that friction is gone, the law becomes purely transactional, a matter of political convenience.
So for the person listening to us right now, maybe on their commute or just trying to get their head around these big ideas, how do we connect this abstract principle to their daily life?
It's absolutely vital. This isn't some high-minded theory that's disconnected from your reality. This is the bedrock guarantee that ensures fairness in your life. It ensures your property is safe. It ensures that if you're ever accused of something, you have the right to an impartial judge.
It's a guardrail.
It's your personal guardrail. So when you see a politician trying to pack a court or pass a law that exempts their own office from oversight, or create some kind of special executive tribunal,
They're attacking that guardrail.
they are attacking your guardrail. They're chipping away at the very structure that gives you the freedom to live your life without the constant fear of arbitrary state action.
That structural view, that concentrated power, is just fundamentally toxic. It forces us to ask where the idea came from. Montesquieu didn't just invent this fear out of thin air.
Not at all. He systematized it.
So where do our sources suggest this wisdom, this idea of dividing power, first showed up not as a philosophy, but as actual practical government policy?
The wisdom is ancient, and the systems we're about to discuss didn't come from a political science department. They came from complex societies trying to build lasting systems of justice. We have to go back to a time when administrative power was, for the first time, deliberately and institutionally separated from the power to judge.
And our sources point us to a really critical historical precedent, one that predates the Enlightenment by, more than 1,000 years?
More than a millennium. We're talking about the actions of the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Let's call him Umar for simplicity. This example is so important because it shows the separation of powers emerging organically. It wasn't about political theory. It was a moral and ethical necessity to ensure justice.
And the context is everything here. This was a period of incredibly rapid expansion for the early Islamic State. The government, the administrative structure, it had to adapt on the fly to govern these huge new territories.
And to do that, the caliph appointed governors, right? The walis.
Exactly. These walis were essentially regional super administrators. They were in charge of everything: collecting taxes, keeping the peace, commanding local military forces, and very often settling local disputes.
So wait a minute. The wali was basically the local legislature, executive, and judiciary all rolled into one, even if the caliph in Medina was the ultimate authority.
Precisely. It was the exact concentrated power scenario we were just describing as being so toxic.
It must have been a functional necessity at first, just to get things done.
It was. But it was also inherently dangerous. Think about it. If a governor gets a bit too aggressive in collecting the tax, the zakat, or decides to seize a piece of land for a public project, who was the final local authority on whether that action was legal or fair?
The governor himself.
The governor himself. The process guaranteed that the powerful could never really be challenged by the weak, and that leads, inevitably, to abuses that undermine the state's entire claim to be founded on justice, or adul.
So what was Umar's specific structural solution to this danger?
His reform was institutional, not personal. He didn't just tell the governors to be more just. He explicitly created the judiciary as an independent branch, totally distinct from the executive functions of the governors. He created a new, dedicated position.
Yeah.
The Qadi, the judge.
And the genius was in how he set it up, right? It's the mechanism of separation.
The mechanism is everything. Because just giving someone a new title isn't enough. You have to separate their loyalties, their incentives, their economic ties.
So how did he do that? How did he make sure the Qadi wasn't just going to be a rubber stamp for the powerful Wali?
It was cemented in three really critical ways. First, the appointment process. The Qadi was not appointed by the local governor. He was appointed directly by the Caliph.
Ah, so his loyalty is to the central concept of justice, not the local administrator.
It creates a dual reporting line. The judge's career and authority flow from Medina, bypassing the local power structure entirely. Second, compensation.
The money.
Always follow the money. The sources tell us the Qadi got a very generous salary, paid directly from the central state treasury. It was calculated to be high enough to insulate the judge from the temptation of bribes, or, just as importantly, from needing financial favors from the governor.
That's huge. Economic independence is the backbone of judicial independence. If the governor signs your paycheck, the governor controls your rulings.
Absolutely. And the third part was the most revolutionary: jurisdiction. The Qadi was explicitly given the authority to hear complaints against the governor.
Against the most powerful person in the province.
Yes. The governor was, in effect, made equal to any other citizen in front of the court. This was the ultimate structural check. The executive branch, no matter how powerful it was locally, was subject to the rulings of the independent judicial branch.
That seems like a basic concept to us now, but for that era, where rulers were almost always considered to be above the law, that must have completely revolutionized the relationship between the government and the governed.
It was absolutely revolutionary. And what it did was it established the principle of judicial review in a sort of nascent form. The system worked because the Qadi had both the authority and the structural independence to look the governor in the eye and say, your action is not in line with the law or the principles of justice, and it must be reversed.
What's fascinating here, as you said, is that this wasn't some philosophical debate about political liberty.
No, it was an ethical mandate. It was necessary for the stability and the legitimacy of the entire empire. Umar understood that injustice breeds dissent. It breeds rebellion. And the only way to have long-term stability is through impartial justice that applies to everyone.
So by creating this independent class of judges, he changed the entire foundation of governance.
He shifted it from the arbitrary will of the executive to the rule of law.
So by highlighting this specific historical action, the sources are really underscoring a major takeaway for anyone listening. This idea, this impulse to separate power, it's a universal solution to the universal problem of human corruption.
It shows that even in these powerful early empires, the danger of concentrated power was recognized and it was structurally dealt with. And the practical success was immense. A person who was wronged by the government, maybe they were taxed unfairly or their land was taken, they didn't have to start a rebellion.
They could go to court.
They could appeal to a respected, independent judge. And this creation of a non-violent structural path for redress, that's arguably one of the greatest innovations in the history of governance. It's what makes a state durable.
Okay, so we have this powerful, ethically driven historical precedent, and it's mainly focused on separating the judicial function from the executive. So how does that one core piece of wisdom, that the judge must be independent, how does that evolve into the much more complex, three-way, self-regulating system that we think of today?
Well, that transition required philosophers. It required thinkers to look at these practical successes, to abstract the core principles from them, and then to systematize them into a universal framework.
It moved from a structure guided by a moral code
To a structure designed as a machine, one that could run independently of the morality of the people inside it.
and that leap to modern constitutionalism, turning that ethical insight into a systematic political science. This is where our sources correctly bring in Montesquieu.
Yes, writing in the 18th century, he becomes the pivotal figure in this transition.
Because Montesquieu, in works like The Spirit of the Laws, he wasn't just observing governments, he was. He was acting like a doctor, diagnosing the disease of centralized authority, and then prescribing a structural cure based on political history.
That's a great way to put it. He saw the dangers in the absolute monarchies of his day, and he recognized the need for a formal division. He formalized it into the now famous tripartite system: legislative, executive, and judicial.
And this is a key step up. The precedent under Umar was mainly a two-way split, the governor versus the Qadi.
A dual separation, yes. Montesquieu argued that for true political liberty to exist, the authority to make the law also had to be fully separated from the authority to enforce it and the authority to interpret it.
Let's dig into that for a second. Why is it so dangerous if the executive also holds the power to make the laws?
Because if the executive can also write the laws, they can just pass new laws to instantly legitimize any questionable action they take. They can even do it retroactively. There's no external check on the scope of their authority.
Whereas a legislature is designed to be slow.
It's designed to be slow, representative, and deliberative. Its whole purpose is to argue, to debate, to find some kind of consensus among many different interests before a rule is made. If the executive can just bypass all of that.
The laws just become tools of convenience?
Exactly. Instruments of administrative convenience, not expressions of the public's will. The full three-part model solves this. It ensures that the interests of the lawmaker, the legislature, are institutionally separate from the interests of the law enforcer, the executive.
So they have to cooperate,
Yeah.
but they also have to be suspicious of each other.
They must remain suspicious of each other. The executive can't create the rules they're bound by, and the legislature can't enforce the rules they create.
Now, the crucial term here, the one that goes beyond just separation, is checks and balances. Montesquieu's system isn't just about putting three independent departments on an org chart.
Not at all. It's about making sure those departments are constantly pushing back against each other, limiting each other's power.
And this is where his sort of cynical view of human nature comes in, right?
It is. He recognized that people, especially people in power, are driven by ambition. So he designed a structure that weaponizes that ambition for the public good. As he famously wrote, "Power must check power."
How does that actually work in practice? That idea of ambition checking ambition?
It creates this beneficial institutional tension. The president, the executive, naturally wants to expand their influence. Congress, the legislative, wants to guard its supremacy in lawmaking. The courts, the judicial, want to protect their role as the final interpreters.
So the structure encourages them to be territorial.
It encourages them to aggressively guard their turf. And in doing so, they involuntarily check the encroachment of the other two branches. A legislature will investigate the executive, not always out of pure idealism,
But to protect its own power.
out of a desire to stop the executive from becoming too strong and making the legislature irrelevant. Ambition counteracts ambition. It makes the structure self-regulating and strong, regardless of whether the leaders are virtuous or not.
This contrast is just so fascinating. The historical separation under Umar was an ethical structure designed for justice, relying on good people.
Yes.
The modern structure from Montesquieu is a systematic machine designed for friction, and it uses human self-interest as its engine.
That is the core insight that our sources are bringing to light. The historical figure trusted in the ideal of justice and piety to guide the system. The Enlightenment philosopher knew that relying on individual virtue is a recipe for political failure.
So the modern system is designed to be a little bit inefficient on purpose.
Like a complex machine with built-in speed bumps. And those speed bumps are things like the presidential veto, the Senate confirmation process, congressional investigations, and the ultimate threat of judicial review. They prevent catastrophic failure by slowing down the acquisition of power.
The result of this whole philosophical project was the creation of a global blueprint. I mean, from the U.S. Constitution to the foundational laws of so many post-colonial states, this tripartite system became the gold standard for defining a legitimate government.
It did. And it's a blueprint that has to be constantly maintained. If a government starts to feel too efficient, if one branch seems to be dominating the entire conversation, or if constitutional challenges just seem to disappear,
That's a bad sign.
that's a very bad sign. It suggests the checks and balances, that necessary friction, have failed. The silence of the other branches is often the loudest indicator of constitutional decay, which means we have to see what happens when this structure is actively defended when it comes under direct attack.
And that brings us from history and theory to the concrete defense of this structure in the modern world. Our source material points us directly to a powerful example of this constitutional defense in action. The case of Sindh High Court Bar v. Federation. This case is so important because it shows that this principle isn't just a museum piece. It's a living doctrine that is actively fought for in courtrooms.
And anytime you see a case that pits a high court bar association against the central government, the Federation, you know you're watching a high-stakes battle over the very structure of the Constitution.
So the name itself tells you the big deal.
A very big deal. The inclusion of this case implies a conflict where the central government tried to alter the balance of power, and it was likely a threat aimed at the independence or the structure of the judiciary itself.
So since we don't have the full text of the judgment in front of us, let's explore what kind of actions a central government, the Federation, might take that would force this kind of legal challenge over the separation of powers.
Well, historically, especially in parliamentary systems, these conflicts tend to revolve around a few major threats. The first and most common is interference with judicial appointments.
How so?
Things like trying to appoint temporary or ad hoc judges to dilute the independence of the permanent judges, or attempting to transfer judges around the country based on political convenience rather than clear constitutional rules. The judiciary has to control its own composition to stay independent.
Okay, that's the first threat. What's the second?
The second is often more insidious. It's when the legislative or executive branch tries to curtail the jurisdiction of the superior courts.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Imagine the executive passes a law creating a new special tribunal to handle, say, corruption cases, and they write directly into that law that the decisions of this new tribunal cannot be reviewed by the high courts.
So they're trying to cut the main judiciary out of the loop?
It's a direct attempt to claw back judicial power and centralize it under the executive branch or a body they control. It guts the system of checks. They're essentially trying to create a parallel court system that only answers to them.
I see. And the third type of conflict?
The third involves delegating what are fundamentally judicial powers to executive bodies. For example, giving a local tax officer the power to levy huge fines or seize property without a clear, effective, independent judicial appeal process. All three of these roads lead right back to our core thesis.
Power concentrated is liberty destroyed.
Exactly. And the court's intervention is required to stop that concentration in its tracks.
What's really striking here is that it was the Sindh High Court Bar Association, a body of lawyers, that was a lead actor in this. It highlights their role as essential constitutional watchdogs. Why is it so often the bar associations on the front lines of these fights?
Because they're the daily practitioners of the rule of law. They understand on a gut level that if the court structure isn't independent, their entire profession, and by extension the rights of all their clients, becomes meaningless.
So it's an act of self-preservation.
It is, but in this context, their self-preservation aligns perfectly with the public interest. If judges become subservient to the Federation, lawyers can no longer genuinely advocate for citizens against the power of the state. They know that if that foundation collapses, the whole building comes down with it. The bar's petition is, in essence, a structural defense of democracy itself.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate goal of the High Court's ruling in a case like this would be to draw a bright, immovable line in the sand.
A bright line. The judgment, in its core reasoning, its ratio, would have reaffirmed that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that the separation of powers is one of its non-negotiable fundamental features. It's part of the basic structure that can't be amended or bypassed, even by a temporary political majority.
And that judicial ruling is the moment the machine resets itself. It's the judiciary declaring that it has a duty to step in and restore the constitutional balance when the other branches get out of line. It's the ultimate check in action.
And it serves a vital signaling function, too.
Yeah.
It sends a message to the executive: we are independent, we are watching. And if you try to consolidate power again, we will strike it down again. This constant vigilance is what maintains the structure.
This system doesn't run on autopilot.
It absolutely doesn't. It requires brave, independent judges and dedicated lawyers to constantly push back against the state's inevitable temptation to centralize its own power.
Let's bring this right down to the listener. We've been talking about these huge constitutional battles. Why does the outcome of a case like Sindh High Court Bar v. Federation actually matter for the individual who's running their small business, or just relying on a stable civil service?
It matters because that structural defense is the only thing that guarantees the law you rely on today will be the same law you rely on tomorrow. If the judiciary had failed to uphold the separation of powers in that case, the door would have swung wide open for arbitrary rule in every part of government.
Taxation, regulations, property disputes?
Everything. The predictability that lets you sign an enforceable contract or trust that a government regulator has to follow a defined set of rules, it all rests on the knowledge that if they don't, There is an independent, separated power, the judiciary, that can hold them accountable. Those judges in that courtroom were fighting for the predictability of your life.
This whole deep dive just reveals that whether we're talking about an ethical mandate from the 7th century or a constitutional court challenge today, the solution to the problem of centralized power is timeless. It's universal. The defense is the structure itself.
Exactly. Good intentions come and go. Good leaders are temporary, but good structures can endure as long as they are actively and bravely defended.
What a profound journey through the architecture of liberty. We've managed to trace the separation of powers, drawing on the incredible insights from episode 103 of True Courtroom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir, all the way from the earliest ethical mandates to its modern legal defense.
We really did. We started with that fundamental truth. Power concentrated is liberty destroyed. And we saw that threat countered by the proactive governance of Umar, who mandated that strict separation between the judicial authority of the Qadi and the executive authority of the Wali,
ensuring impartial justice through both structural and, crucially, economic independence.
Then that historical insight was systematized and broadened by Montesquieu. He translated that two-way split into the tripartite system, legislative, executive, and judicial, and gave us the principle of checks and balances.
The system designed to make ambition counteract ambition, creating a stable, self-regulating machine for free states.
And finally, we saw that very blueprint tested and defended in the modern legal world. We referenced cases like Sindh High Court Bar v. Federation, which really stands as this powerful testament to the judiciary's ongoing active role as the final guardian of the constitutional structure.
The essential insight from all this, I think, is that freedom isn't a gift from benevolent leaders. It's secured by tedious, difficult, and sometimes messy structure. This idea of keeping power divided is the timeless solution to a universal human problem, the temptation of centralized authority.
And this raises an important question for you, for the listener. We've talked about high courts and ancient caliphates, but these principles apply everywhere. How robust is the separation of powers in the institutions you rely on every single day? Maybe it's your local city council or a large corporation you work for, or even your university board. Ask yourself, are the people who set the policies also the final judges of any disputes? Is there a clear, independent appeal process? If those structural checks aren't fully visible, if it all flows back to one office, then that core principle of liberty is already compromised. We all have to become vigilant defenders of that necessary friction that keeps any system, big or small, free.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.